Maize is a cultigen. Human intervention is required for it to propagate. Whether or not the kernels fall off the cob on their own is a key piece of evidence used in archaeology to distinguish domesticated maize from its naturally propagating teosinte ancestor. Genetic evidence can also be used to determine when various lineages split. Most historians believe maize was domesticated in the Tehuacan Valley of Mexico. Recent research in the early 21st century has modified this view somewhat. Scholars now indicate the adjacent Balsas River Valley of south-central Mexico as the center of domestication. An 2002 study by Matsuoka et al. Has demonstrated that, rather than the multiple independent domestications model, all maize arose from a single domestication in southern Mexico about 9,000 years ago. The study also demonstrated that the oldest surviving maize types are those of the Mexican highlands. Later, maize spread from this region over the Americas along two major paths. This is consistent with a model based on the archaeological record suggesting that maize diversified in the highlands of Mexico before spreading to the lowlands. According to a genetic study by the Brazilian Agricultural Research Corporation, Embrapa, corn cultivation was introduced in South America from Mexico, in two great waves. The first, more than 6,000 years ago, spread through the Andes. Evidence of cultivation in Peru has been found dating to about 6,700 years ago. The second wave, about 2,000 years ago, through the lowlands of South America. The earliest maize plants grew only small, 25 mm long corn ears, and only one per plant. In Jackson Spielvogel's view, many centuries of artificial selection, rather than the current view that maize was exploited by interplanting with teosinte, by the indigenous people of the Americas resulted in the development of maize plants capable of growing several ears per plant, which were usually several centimeters, inches long each. The Olmec and Maya cultivated maize in numerous varieties throughout Mesoamerica. They cooked, ground and processed it through nixtamalization. It was believed that beginning about 2500 BC, the crop spread through much of the Americas. Research of the 21st century has established even earlier dates. The region developed a trade network based on surplus and varieties of maize crops. Mapuches of south-central Chile cultivated maize along with quinoa and potatoes in pre-Hispanic times. However, potato was the staple food of most Mapuches, especially in the southern and coastal Mapuche territories where maize did not reach maturity. Before the expansion of the Inca Empire, maize was traded and transported as far south as 40 degrees 19 S in Malinquina, Lucar Department. In that location, maize remains were found inside pottery dated to 730 plus or minus 80 BP and 920 plus or minus 60 BP. Probably this maize was brought across the Andes from Chile. The presence of maize in Guaidecas archipelago, the southernmost outpost of pre-Hispanic agriculture, is reported by early Spanish explorers. However, the Spanish may have misidentified the plant. By at least 1000 BCE, the Olmec in Mesoamerica had based their calendar, language, myths and worldview with maize at the center of their symbolism. After the arrival of Europeans in 1492, Spanish settlers consumed maize, and explorers and traders carried it back to Europe and introduced it to other countries. Spanish settlers much preferred wheat bread to maize, cassava, or potatoes. Maize flour could not be substituted for wheat for communion bread, since in Christian belief only wheat could undergo transubstantiation and be transformed into the body of Christ. Some Spaniards worried that by eating indigenous foods, which they did not consider nutritious, they would weaken and risk turning into Indians. In the view of Europeans, it was the food they ate, even more than the environment in which they lived, that gave Amerindians and Spaniards both their distinctive physical characteristics and their characteristic personalities. Despite these worries, Spaniards did consume maize. Archaeological evidence from Florida sites indicate they cultivated it as well. Maize spread to the rest of the world because of its ability to grow in diverse climates. It was cultivated in Spain just a few decades after Columbus's voyages and then spread to Italy, West Africa and elsewhere. Widespread cultivation most likely began in southern Spain in 1525, after which it quickly spread to the rest of the Spanish Empire including its territories in Italy and, from there, to other Italian states. Maize had many advantages over wheat and barley. It yielded 2.5 times the food energy per unit cultivated area, could be harvested in successive years from the same plot of land, and grew in wildly varying altitudes and climates, from relatively dry regions with only 250 millimeters of annual rainfall to damp regions with over 5,000 millimeters. By the 17th century, it was a common peasant food in southwestern Europe, including Portugal, Spain, southern France, and Italy. By the 18th century, it was the chief food of the southern French and Italian peasantry, especially in the form of polenta in Italy. When maize was first introduced into farming systems other than those used by traditional Native American peoples, it was generally welcomed with enthusiasm for its productivity. However, a widespread problem of malnutrition soon arose wherever maize was introduced as a staple food. This was a mystery, since these types of malnutrition were not normally seen among the indigenous Americans, for whom maize was the principal staple food. It was eventually discovered that the indigenous Americans had learned to soak maize in alkali water, the process now known as nixtamalization, made with ashes and lime, calcium oxide, since at least 1200–1500 BC by Mesoamericans. They did this to liberate the corn hulls, but unbeknownst to natives or colonists, it coincidentally liberates the B vitamin niacin, the lack of which was the underlying cause of the condition known as pellagra. Maize was introduced into the diet of non-indigenous Americans without the necessary cultural knowledge acquired over thousands of years in the Americas. In the late 19th century, pellagra reached epidemic proportions in parts of the southern U.S., as medical researchers debated two theories for its origin. The deficiency theory, which was eventually shown to be true, said that pellagra was due to a deficiency of some nutrient, and the germ theory said that pellagra was caused by a germ transmitted by stable flies. A third theory, promoted by the eugenicist Charles Davenport, held that people only contracted pellagra if they were susceptible to it due to certain constitutional, inheritable traits of the affected individual. Once alkali processing and dietary variety were understood and applied, pellagra disappeared in the developed world. The development of high lysine maize and the promotion of a more balanced diet have also contributed to its demise. Pellagra still exists today in food-poor areas and refugee camps where people survive on donated maize. Maize contains lipid transfer protein, an indigestible protein that survives cooking. This protein has been linked to a rare and understudied allergy to maize in humans. The allergic reaction can cause skin rash, swelling or itching of mucous membranes, diarrhea, vomiting, asthma and, in severe cases, anaphylaxis. It is unclear how common this allergy is in the general population. The maize plant has an Opal's allergy scale rating of 5 out of 10, indicating moderate potential to cause allergic reactions, exacerbated by overuse of the same plant throughout a garden. Corn pollen is heavy, large, and usually airborne in the early morning. Fungicide application does not reduce fungal growth or mycotoxin dramatically, although it can be a part of a successful reduction strategy. Among the most common toxins are those produced by Aspergillus and Fusarium spp. The most common toxins are aflatoxins, fuminizins, zearalenone, and ochratoxin A. Bt maize discourages insect vectors and by so doing it dramatically reduces concentrations of fuminizins, significantly reduces aflatoxins, but only mildly reduces others. Maize, also known as corn, North American and Australian English, is a cereal grain first domesticated by indigenous peoples in southern Mexico about 10,000 years ago. The leafy stalk of the plant produces pollen inflorescences, or tassels, and separate ovaliferous inflorescences called ears that when fertilized yield kernels or seeds, which are fruits. The term maize is preferred in formal, scientific, and international usage as a common name because it refers specifically to this one grain, unlike corn, which has a complex variety of meanings that vary by context and geographic region. Maize has become a staple food in many parts of the world, with the total production of maize surpassing that of wheat or rice. In addition to being consumed directly by humans, often in the form of masa, maize is also used for corn ethanol, animal feed and other maize products, such as corn starch and corn syrup. The 6 major types of maize are dent corn, flint corn, pod corn, popcorn, flour corn, and sweet corn. Sugar-rich varieties called sweet corn are usually grown for human consumption as kernels, while field corn varieties are used for animal feed. Various corn-based human food uses, including grinding into cornmeal or masa, pressing into corn oil, fermentation and distillation into alcoholic beverages like bourbon whiskey, and as feedstocks for the chemical industry. Maize is also used in making ethanol and other biofuels. Maize is widely cultivated throughout the world, and a greater weight of maize is produced each year than any other grain. In 2021, total world production was 1.2 billion tons. Maize is the most widely grown grain crop throughout the Americas, with 384 million metric tons grown in the United States alone in 2021. Genetically modified maize made up 85% of the maize planted in the United States in 2009. Subsidies in the United States help to account for its high level of cultivation of maize and its position as the largest producer in the world. The susceptibility of maize to the European corn borer and corn rootworms, and the resulting large crop losses, which are estimated at $1 billion worldwide for each pest, led to the development of transgenics expressing the Bacillus thuringiensis toxin. Bt maize is widely grown in the United States and has been approved for release in Europe. Maize and cornmeal, ground dried maize, constitute a staple food in many regions of the world. Maize is used to produce cornstarch, a common ingredient in home cooking and many industrialized food products. Maize starch can be hydrolyzed and enzymatically treated to produce syrups, particularly high fructose corn syrup, a sweetener, and also fermented and distilled to produce grain alcohol. Grain alcohol from maize is traditionally the source of bourbon whiskey. Corn flour is used to make cornbread and other baked products.